The Forgotten Daughter. The rain hammered against the windscreen as Margot Bellamy's ancient Volkswagen spluttered up the gravel drive. She was 2 hours late. The funeral had been yesterday. A Tuesday she'd spent shelving returned books and helping Mrs. Patterson find large print mysteries. She hadn't attended. Her father, Harold Bellamy, shipping magnate and notorious workaholic, wouldn't have noticed her absence. He'd barely noticed her presence for the past 20 years. The Bellamy estate loomed before her, a Gothic monument to old money and older grudges. Margot killed the engine and sat for a moment, watching the rain trace patterns down the glass. She'd received the terse message from Theodore Pembroke, her father's attorney, at 7 that morning. Presence required at will reading, 10 a.m. sharp. Do not be late. She was late. She was always late to everything that mattered to the Bellamys. Margot grabbed her worn satchel and darted through the downpour. The massive oak door opened before she could knock. Theodore Pembroke stood in the doorway, his silver beard immaculate, his expression inscrutable behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Miss Bellamy," he said, his voice carrying decades of legal precision. "We've been waiting. I'm sorry. Come." He turned without waiting for her explanation. The library was exactly as Margot remembered from childhood visits, all dark wood paneling and leather-bound books that nobody read. Seated in the high-backed chairs were the usual suspects. Her stepmother, Patricia, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief. Uncle Desmond, Harold's younger brother, checking his phone with barely concealed impatience. And Victoria. Victoria Bellamy sat like a queen holding court, her designer suit probably costing more than Margot's monthly salary. At 35, Victoria was everything Margot wasn't, polished, confident, and utterly ruthless. She'd been Patricia's daughter from a previous marriage, adopted by Harold when Margot was 12. From that day forward, Margot had become invisible. "How kind of you to join us, Margot," Victoria said, her smile sharp as cut glass. "We were just discussing how Father always said punctuality was a sign of respect." Margot slid into the remaining empty chair, acutely aware of her damp cardigan and scuffed shoes. "I had work." "At the library," Victoria said, making it sound like a particularly unpleasant disease. "How quaint." "Ladies," Theodore interrupted, settling behind the massive mahogany desk. He opened a leather portfolio with deliberate care. "Shall we proceed?" The reading was exactly what Margot expected. Uncle Desmond received a generous trust fund. Patricia got the London townhouse and a lifetime stipend. Victoria inherited the shipping company, Bellamy Maritime Holdings, worth an estimated £300 million, along with the family's investment portfolio and the fleet of properties across Europe. Margot waited for her name. When Theodore finally said it, she felt everyone's eyes turn toward her. "And to my daughter, Margot Elizabeth Bellamy," Theodore read, his voice carefully neutral. "I leave the remainder of my estate, including all personal effects, the contents of my private study, and the property known as Whitmore House, with all furnishings and belongings therein." The silence that followed was deafening. Whitmore House. Victoria's voice cracked with disbelief. "That crumbling ruin on the coast? Father hasn't been there in decades." Theodore continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Additionally, Miss Margot Bellamy is to receive the contents of Safety Deposit Box 742 at Coutts Bank, London, to be accessed privately within 30 days. Margot's mind reeled. Whitmore House was where she'd spent summers with her mother before the cancer took her. She was 8 when they'd left for the last time, her mother too weak to climb the stairs. After her mother died, Harold had locked it up and never mentioned it again. "This is absurd." Victoria stood, her composure fracturing. "A derelict beach house? That's what she gets?" "The will is clear," Theodore said. Uncle Desmond snorted. At least Harold had the sense to leave the real assets to someone competent. Margot felt the familiar sting of dismissal, but something else stirred beneath it. Curiosity. Why Whitmore House? Why now? And what was in that safety deposit box? "If there's nothing else," she said quietly, standing. "Wait." Theodore's hand emerged from the portfolio holding a small envelope, yellowed with age. "Your father left specific instructions. This is for you alone. Margot took it, feeling the weight of everyone's stares. Victoria's eyes burned with suspicion. Outside, the rain had stopped. Margot sat in her car and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a key and a note in her father's angular handwriting. Margot, forgive me. The truth is in the walls. HB. She stared at the key, its brass worn smooth with age, and felt something shift in her chest. For 20 years, she'd been the forgotten daughter, the afterthought, the girl who chose books over boardrooms. But her father's final words suggested she'd been wrong about everything. The forgotten daughter was about to remember. The courthouse conspiracy 3 months after the will reading, Margot stood in the marble halls of the Royal Courts of Justice, feeling like an imposter in her borrowed suit. The truth she'd discovered at Whitmore House had led her here, to this battlefield of legal warfare where Victoria wielded her father's fortune like a weapon. The lawsuit had arrived 6 weeks earlier. Victoria Bellamy vs. Margot Bellamy, contest of testamentary capacity and undue influence. Victoria claimed their father had been mentally incompetent when he drafted his final will, manipulated by a daughter who'd suddenly reappeared after years of estrangement. It was a lie. But lies told with enough money behind them had a way of becoming truth. Miss Bellamy? A woman's voice cut through Margot's spiraling thoughts. I'm Judge Helena Cross. We'll be convening in courtroom 7. Judge Cross was formidable. Late 50s, steel gray hair pulled back severely, eyes that missed nothing. Margot had researched her thoroughly. Helena Cross had a reputation for cutting through pretense and despising manipulation. She was their best hope, though Owen Hastings, Victoria's attorney, was a maestro at manipulation. Inside the courtroom, Victoria sat beside Hastings, a portrait of wounded dignity. She'd dressed in understated black, playing the grieving daughter robbed of her rightful inheritance. Hastings was a predator in Savile Row tailoring, his smile practiced and empty. Margot's attorney, a young solicitor named Rebecca Walsh, whom she could barely afford, looked nervous. They were outgunned and everyone knew it. All rise, the clerk announced. Judge Cross swept in, her robes billowing. Be seated. Mr. Hastings, you may present your opening statement. Hastings stood with theatrical grace. Your Honor, this case concerns a vulnerable elderly man, Harold Bellamy, who in his final months was systematically isolated and manipulated by a daughter who had abandoned him for 2 decades. Miss Margot Bellamy, he gestured toward her with barely concealed contempt, reappeared only when her father's health declined, exploiting his loneliness and cognitive decline to alter his will dramatically. Margot's hands clenched in her lap. Every word was calculated poison. My client, Victoria Bellamy, devoted herself to her father's care. She ran his company, managed his affairs, ensured his comfort. Yet she was cut from the primary inheritance in favor of someone who couldn't even attend his funeral. Hastings paused for effect. We will demonstrate that Harold Bellamy lacked testamentary capacity when this will was drafted, and that Miss Margot Bellamy exerted undue influence through emotional manipulation. He sat down, satisfaction radiating from him. Judge Cross turned to Rebecca. Ms. Walsh? Rebecca stood, her voice steadier than Margot expected. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Harold Bellamy was of sound mind, that his final will reflected genuine wishes, and that Miss Margot Bellamy had no contact with her father during the period in question. The truth, Your Honor, is quite different from the story Mr. Hastings wishes to tell. The first day was brutal. Hastings paraded witness after witness, society friends who barely knew Harold, business associates who confirmed Victoria's competence, a doctor who testified about Harold's declining health. Each testimony painted Margot as a ghost who haunted the edges of Harold's life, invisible until money appeared. During recess, Victoria cornered Margot in the corridor. You should withdraw, she said, her voice low and venomous. You're embarrassing yourself. That house is worthless anyway. Probably costs more to demolish than it's worth. Take £50,000 and disappear back to your books. Why do you care so much about a worthless house? Margot asked quietly. Something flickered in Victoria's eyes. Fear, quickly masked. I don't. I care about Father's legacy not being tarnished by your pathetic grab for attention. But Margot had seen it. Victoria knew something about Whitmore House, something that terrified her. The breakthrough came on day 3. Rebecca called Theodore Pembroke to the stand. The elderly attorney had initially seemed reluctant to participate, bound by professional discretion, but something had changed his mind. "Mr. Pembroke," Rebecca began, "you were Harold Bellamy's attorney for how many years?" 42 years, Theodore replied, his voice steady. "And you drafted his final will?" "I did." "In your professional opinion, was Harold Bellamy of sound mind when he gave you instructions for this will?" Theodore looked directly at Judge Cross. "Absolutely. In fact, his mind was clearer in those final months than I'd seen it in years. He was determined, purposeful." Hastings leapt up. "Objection, speculation." "Overruled," Judge Cross said. "Continue, Mr. Pembroke. Harold Bellamy came to my office 8 months before his death. He brought with him a box of documents, letters primarily that he'd recently discovered. He spent 3 hours explaining exactly what he wanted done and why." Theodore paused. "He was adamant that Margot receive Whitmore House. He said, and I quote, 'My daughter deserves to know the truth and Victoria must never find it.'" The courtroom erupted. Hastings was shouting objections. Victoria had gone pale. Judge Cross's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order!" "Mr. Hastings, approach the bench. Ms. Walsh, you too." During the whispered conference, Margot felt her heart hammering. Theodore had just opened a door she wasn't sure they could walk through. What truth? What had her father hidden at Whitmore House? When the attorneys returned, Judge Cross's expression was unreadable. "Mr. Pembroke, these letters you mentioned, do they still exist?" "They do, Your Honor. They're in my firm's vault. Harold gave me copies for safekeeping. I want them submitted as evidence by tomorrow morning." Judge Cross's gaze swung to Victoria. "Miss Victoria Bellamy, did you know about these letters?" Victoria's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she shook him off. "I have no idea what he's talking about, Your Honor. My father's illness clearly affected his judgment." "That's not what I asked," Judge Cross interrupted. "Have you been to Whitmore House in the past 6 months?" The question hung in the air like a blade. "I may have driven past it. I was concerned about the property's condition." "Your Honor," Rebecca interjected, pulling out her phone, "I have photographs taken by Miss Margot Bellamy 3 weeks ago. The locks on Whitmore House had been recently forced. Someone searched the property extensively, causing significant damage. Margot had discovered the break-in when she'd first visited the house. Rooms had been ransacked, floorboards pried up, walls examined. Someone had been desperately searching for something." Judge Cross's expression hardened. "This trial is adjourned until Monday. Mr. Pembroke, I want those letters. Ms. Walsh, file a police report about the break-in. And Miss Victoria Bellamy," her voice could have cut steel, "if I discover you've tampered with evidence or this property, I will hold you in contempt. Am I clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Victoria whispered. As the courtroom emptied, Margot caught Theodore's eye. He gave her the slightest nod, an acknowledgement of alliance, of secrets about to surface. Outside, Rebecca grabbed Margot's arm. "What's in those letters? Do you know?" Margot thought of the key her father had left her, of the safety deposit box she'd opened weeks ago. Inside had been a bundle of letters in her mother's handwriting, addressed to Harold but returned unopened, and a leather journal filled with her father's anguished confessions. She knew exactly what was in those letters. They revealed that Victoria wasn't Harold's adopted daughter at all. Patricia had lied about everything. Victoria was the daughter of Harold's business rival, planted in the family to steal industrial secrets. And Whitmore House contained the proof. Documents her mother had hidden before she died. Insurance against Patricia's manipulations. Harold had discovered the truth too late, after Victoria had already embedded herself in the company. He'd spent his final months protecting what remained, leaving Victoria the business she'd earned through deceit, but ensuring Margot received the truth. "The letters," Margot said quietly, "are going to change everything." Victoria emerged from the courthouse, her mask finally slipping. She looked directly at Margot, and her expression was pure hatred. The war had begun in earnest. The sanctuary built. The courtroom was silent as Judge Helena Cross read the letters aloud. Each word was a detonation, destroying the carefully constructed lie that Victoria Bellamy had lived for 23 years. "My dearest Harold," Judge Cross read from Margot's mother's elegant script, dated 18 months before her death. "I've discovered something terrible about Patricia and her daughter. The documents I found in your study, the Bellamy Maritime Shipping Manifests, the classified port contracts, Victoria has been photographing them. I followed her to a meeting with Richard Blackwell, your competitor, your enemy. Harold, they're using us, using our family. I've made copies and hidden them at Whitmore. Please, we must act carefully. Our daughter Margot must be protected from this." Victoria sat frozen, her expensive facade cracking like porcelain. Owen Hastings had his head in his hands. Patricia, called as a witness that morning, had already fled the courtroom in tears. Theodore Pembroke had brought everything. 37 letters returned unopened. Harold's journal documenting his discovery, and most damning, bank statements showing payments from Blackwell Industries to Patricia's private accounts, dating back 25 years. "Mr. Hastings," Judge Cross said, her voice ice, "does your client wish to continue this contest?" Hastings stood slowly. He looked at Victoria, who sat trembling, then back at the judge. "Your Honor, we respectfully withdraw our petition." Wise choice. Judge Cross's eyes were flint. "Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the Crown Prosecution Service. Miss Victoria Bellamy, while industrial espionage falls outside this court's purview, your attempt to defraud Miss Margot Bellamy through false testimony and destruction of property does not. You'll be hearing from investigators." Victoria stood on shaking legs. For just a moment, she looked at Margot, not with hatred anymore, but with something like despair. The life she'd built, the identity she'd worn like armor, was disintegrating. "The original will stands," Judge Cross concluded. "This court is adjourned." As the courtroom emptied, Rebecca hugged Margot tightly. "You won. You actually won." But Margot felt no triumph, only a hollow exhaustion. She'd won her inheritance, but the price was learning that her entire childhood had been a battlefield she hadn't known she was fighting on. Theodore approached, his expression gentler than she'd ever seen it. "Your mother was a remarkable woman, Margot. She protected you the only way she could. By hiding the truth? By preserving it," Theodore corrected. "She knew Patricia would destroy any evidence she found. So she created a puzzle that only you could solve, hidden in the one place Victoria would never think to look thoroughly. The house filled with your mother's memory. Margot had found it all, in the end. Behind the loose brick in her childhood bedroom's fireplace, account ledgers, photographed documents, even a recorded conversation between Patricia and Blackwell, discussing how to maximize the intelligence Victoria could gather. Her mother had been building a case, planning to expose them, when the cancer accelerated. She died protecting Margot from a truth that would have destroyed their family even faster. "What happens to Victoria now?" Margot asked. "The CPS will investigate. Likely charges for fraud, possibly espionage, though that case is complex." Theodore paused. "Your father's journal suggests he knew for the past 2 years but did nothing. He was protecting the company's reputation, I think. His last act was ensuring you got the evidence. So the choice of what to do with it became yours, not his burden. So he left me the truth as inheritance, and the freedom to decide what truth is worth," Theodore said. 1 year later, Margot stood in the grand entrance of Whitmore House, barely recognizing it. The crumbling beach house had been transformed into something her mother would have loved, a living memorial to truth and second chances. The Whitmore Foundation for Literacy and Arts occupied the restored mansion. The library, where Margot had found her mother's hidden evidence, now housed 10,000 books, free for the community. Her mother's studio had become an art classroom. The master bedroom was now a reading room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sea. "Miss Bellamy?" A young woman approached nervously. She was 19, all sharp angles and cautious hope. "I'm Nina Ortega. I'm here for the writing residency interview." Margot smiled, remembering the girl she'd been, invisible, uncertain, overlooked. "Please call me Margot. Tell me about your work." Nina pulled out a battered notebook. "I write about my neighborhood. about people like my mom who work 3 jobs and still can't catch a break. But I couldn't afford university, so I stock shelves at night and write on my breaks. When I saw your foundation's advertisement, no application fee, no degree required, just submit your writing, I thought maybe someone would actually read it. I read every word, Margot said softly. You have a gift, Nina, a genuine voice. That's why you're here. But there are probably hundreds of applicants more qualified. Qualification isn't the same as talent, Margot interrupted. My mother taught me that. She believed the most important voices are often the quietest, and that giving someone space to be heard can change everything. She handed Nina a folder. 6-month residency, private room, full stipend, no obligations except to write honestly. The only rule is that you can't doubt yourself here. This is a place for truth. Nina's eyes filled with tears. Why are you doing this? Margot looked around the house. Her mother's house, her house, now everyone's house. Because someone once hid the truth to protect me, and someone else revealed it to free me. Truth is the most valuable inheritance, Nina. It's the only thing worth passing on. Through the window, she could see the sea her mother had loved. Somewhere out there, Victoria was rebuilding her life under a new name. Patricia was facing fraud charges, and the Bellamy Maritime Empire was being dismantled and sold. Its pieces distributed to charity as Margot had directed. She'd kept nothing of her father's fortune except Whitmore House and enough to run the foundation. The rest she'd donated to literacy programs, to legal aid, to organizations that helped people find their voices. The money had never been the point. Her father's final gift hadn't been wealth. It had been the truth, and the freedom to decide what to do with it. Come on, Margot said to Nina. Let me show you your room. There's a desk by the window where the light is perfect in the mornings. My mother used to write there. She always said this house held stories in its walls. As they climbed the stairs, Margot thought about that day in the courtroom, standing invisible and forgotten while Victoria took everything. She'd driven away from the will, reading thinking she'd inherited nothing but a broken-down beach house and her father's cryptic apology. Instead, she'd inherited something far more valuable, the knowledge that being overlooked could be the greatest advantage. That silence could be the loudest weapon, and that the forgotten daughter could become the remembered mother of a new legacy. In the end, Victoria had been right about one thing. Whitmore House was worthless as property, but as a sanctuary for truth, for second chances, for voices that deserved to be heard, it was priceless. And that was the only inheritance that mattered. The end.